Hi, I'm Beth Comstock. I'm here today with another book club. Excited to have Jem Stengel. Jem, welcome. Thanks.
Thank you,
We've
Beth.
got some folks here and some folks online, and we're here to talk about your new book, Unleashing the Innovators. And it's all about how mature companies find new life with startups. It's just a great concept. We've been living it. Luckily, we get to be in your book, which is exciting. So tell us a little bit about the book. What's the premise and what led you to write it?
Sure. I think what's maybe most interesting to start with is kind of why I did it and how long the idea's been kicking around in my head. I was at Procter & Gamble for a long time, and that's where Beth and I met when I was CMO there and you were CMO of GE. And when Google was a startup, we started talking to each other and realized we didn't understand each other at all. And how are we expected to work together if we just couldn't speak each other's language? So Tim Armstrong, who was head of sales at the time, he's now CEO of Oath, a Verizon company. We said, why don't we exchange employees? So this is like 12 years ago. So we sent, and this wasn't peripheral, we sent Pampers people and Charmin people and Bounty people and Tide people to Mountain View, and they worked in search for a month. Not a few days, a month. And they sent people to work in our brands. And it shook them both up. And they had to go back and write a report about what we should do differently as companies. And the reports were really profound, and they got a really high-level audience. Tim will tell you to this day, Google changed its sales organization based on that employee exchange. And we just thought about innovation differently and scope of innovation and speed of innovation.
And you guys P&G has always been very good at innovation.
Yeah,
so
pretty good, but it was like, wow.
Yeah.
So that's been kicking around in my head, and I left the company shortly after that, actually, about 9 years ago. And I started a little firm of friends who really help companies discover their purpose and activate it. Everyone we're working with has startups all around. And I thought, what's going on here? And so I started asking people, what's your strategy on this? Why are you doing it? What's working? And I was getting some interesting answers, but it was a little bit all over the place. So, and I was kind of head of a startup myself, right? I left P&G on a Friday. We had a big Halloween party, and everyone had to come as a character, a P&G character.
Oh, so like Mr. Clean?
Yeah, Mr. Clean. We had 6 Mr. Cleans.
I can imagine. Yeah. What were you? Do
we
you
had a couple
what you
bounty roles. I actually went a little bit off character. I came as Gomez, and my wife came as Morticia.
Oh,
so we came.
Because you were hosting the party.
We were hosting the party. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had the smoking jacket, the big mustache, the cigar. But we had someone come as YouTube. We had someone come as Mr. Whipple. We had a lot of Mr. Cleans. It was fun. It was fun. And anyway, I left it on a Friday, started on Monday with 1 employee and no revenue. So I thought, well, I'm kind of a startup. I worked at a big company. What's going on here? So I didn't really have a thesis when I started. I just was curious.
Yeah.
And then as I started doing qualitative, and you were at the beginning of that, I thought, there's some great stories here. If nothing else, there's a lot of inspiring stories, both in legacy companies and in startups. But what happened is I collaborated with a guy named Tom Post writing the book. I like working with someone. We started to say, why don't we try to write a playbook for someone who's doing partnerships and wants to do them better, or someone who maybe not be doing partnerships but is curious about it. So the book kind of evolved into a playbook with lots of amazing stories in it. And we end with a little bit of an assessment for someone to take for their company, how prepared they are.
I thought the assessment was really well done. Give people a sense of some of the questions that are in the assessment.
Well, it kind of asks, are you clear on your goals?
Yeah.
Are you asking questions about culture? Is someone accountable for it? Do you have continuity in your leadership in the space? So it's all the things we learn from companies like yours. And then so we kind of end with that, and then I end with a little bit of an inspiring note about this has to start somewhere. So why doesn't it start with you?
Yeah.
Change starts with individuals. You were just with Satya at Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
Look at the amazing change he's making. So one person can make a profound difference. I really believe that. So I just hope the book, will inspire someone to maybe be a bit better. The other thing that we took out of the book at the end of it was what came up in almost every interview was this sense of personal courage. Because these things are not easy.
Yeah.
Sue Siegel was very clear about that when you interviewed her from your company. But, and this issue of courage is still not where it needs to be in enterprises and in some startups. So we've also developed a little bit of a personal, we kind of unpack that, because it's easy to say, be courageous, fail fast. but what does that really mean, and how do you unpack it, and what do we work on specifically as a leader?
Yeah.
So we did a little bit of a courage assessment, which we took out of the book. We didn't want to double up on assessments at the end.
But that'll give you it for your next book.
Yeah, right.
Now, this is
So that's why I did it, and it's been great. I mean, I love having a content project. I think it keeps you curious, it keeps you fresh.
This was some content project. I think you said you worked for 15 months doing research?
At least.
At least. And then you did a very thoughtful research study. Talk about that. You hired Ogilvy Red to do a research study, and you came out with some very interesting results. Yeah,
we sure did. We did a lot of qualitative, and qualitative was wonderful, and we sort of got the thesis of the book sort of laid out. But, like GE, I come from a company that values data and analytics. I spent 25 years at Procter & Gamble. I wanted a quant
I think
backbone.
I recall at Procter & Gamble, you built one of the biggest marketing analytics efforts that companies have
in the early
seen.
days, and they continue to evolve it. So we did a quant study. I went to a researcher, Joanna Seddon, who used to be at Millward Brown. She's now at Ogilvy Red. I worked with her at P&G. I worked with her in my first book. She's a brilliant researcher. So she and her team gave me a bespoke recommendation on how to study partnerships. So I said, let's do it. We designed the study and fielded it. 201 firms, 101 startups, 100 legacy companies all over the world, lots of different industries. And that data is woven throughout the book, and then at the end of it we have an appendix that goes through. But it looks at, why do things fail? Why do things succeed? What are the most important characteristics? So stuff that you may know intuitively, but we sort of got some quant behind it.
Well, one that stuck with me was your study. You said that enterprises with successful partnerships are 3 times more likely to have major positive impact on their entire organization than those who don't.
Which is crazy.
Right, 3 times.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking...
Yeah. That's reason enough to do partnerships.
Yeah, but let's dig into that a little bit. Partnerships, you and I have worked for a while. We know big companies. Partnerships, certainly in the world I used to know, meant do it my way. Mm-hmm. Big companies, I remember a day when companies were like, we're going to do a partnership, and the first question was, what's your percent ownership? And if you didn't have 51%, it wasn't worth doing. Those days are so gone. Yeah. They're still hard. I mean, how do you advise big companies to think about partnering with startups?
Sure. Well, one interesting piece of data from the study was that once you start partnerships or a partnership strategy, the companies that put the startup leader in charge of the venture are way more successful than those that put a legacy leader.
Makes sense, but...
It does make sense.
But it's hard.
It is hard. So we wanted to bring some data to that. And then the other thing I would say to companies is don't run by the 2 things that make partnerships succeed. And that is building a trusting relationship and having a shared purpose. And again, maybe that sounds intuitive, but do we really spend the time to build the relationship? To meet people, to get to know them, to do it in a human way? And once you do that, you can do all sorts of things electronically. So, deep relationship, deep trust, shared purpose. Don't get off the purpose. If you veer off the purpose, bring it back.
Yeah, it's a good way to stay grounded.
But that's what the quant showed.
In fact, one of your questions you say, one of you're asking in your assessment, is your company prepared to give startup partners decision-making authority and enough autonomy to remain in their element as agile, fast-moving risk takers? That's the other thing.
Right.
Maybe you give them autonomy, but you're saying now we're big, do it my way.
Yeah, that's right. One of the great interviews in the book was with a guy named Flemming Ornskov, which he's a Danish pediatrician by training, but he's the CEO of Shire, which is about a $15 billion company, not your size. But their purpose is to solve the rare diseases of the world. So and he's an amazing human being.
Pretty powerful purpose.
Oh my God, yeah. But he personally himself is always looking out to see what's happening in science, in research. And he'll go out and meet personally with a team of 3 people or a team of 10 people. And if they decide to start a partnership, they report to him. And he says to them, stay in your place, stay where you're comfortable. And if it's right and you think it's right to join our company and move, then we'll do that. But he gives them tremendous leverage and freedom, and they report to him, and he himself is personally involved with them.
So that's a lot of trust happening in that.
And he's spending his time in a different way than most CEOs.
Let's talk about risk aversion. I mean, you point out that, I love your headline here, risk aversion, the opiate of the corporate masses. No one here, I think, would know what you're talking about. Why are we so risk averse? It's not easy,
because
right?
I think that we still are not, in most of the corporate world, ready to let someone fail. And actually, I think, I'm not saying this to be patronizing because we're here at GE. I think of all the companies I talk to, you seem to be reaching out there to address that more aggressively than anyone I talk to in this book research. And I just made a presentation yesterday at Adweek on the book, and I have an audio clip from Arif Aziz, who works in HR for you guys in Africa and South Asia. And he talked about the DARE Award and what he's trying to do deliberately to show that it's okay to have productive failure. That's part of business, it's part of innovation, it's part of creativity. And he's passionate about it, and it's clear and it's specific, and there are early results. We need more of that.
Yeah. I think our healthcare business has taken that to heart. In fact, a quote from your book from Arif is, he says, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. What a great mindset.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think he borrowed that from James Maxwell, the other author. But great, he loves that.
He took it to heart.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's, I find that in a lot of enterprises, because the macroeconomic climate is such that a lot of companies have slowed down, large companies. So when you slow down, there's less growth, less promotions, less opportunity. So people get really cautious, and they play to kind of not lose, keep my job. And that's really dangerous. That just gets at the heart of a company. Great startups, and you know this, you walk into that building and all they care about is the product, the service, the customer. And they're in love with what they're doing. We visit.
Well, they love their customer.
They love their customer. We visited Pinterest on site in research for this book. You walk into Pinterest, you just go, oh my God, there's so much love in this building. I mean, the customers are all over the walls, their hobbies are all over the walls, there's hobbies all throughout the office. And I said to Ben Silverman, the founder, what's your greatest fear in this high growth company? And he just said in his very humble way, I never want to disappoint one of our customers, not one. It's my greatest fear. And if we had more of that spirit in large enterprises, which all started with that, and we get distracted, we get political, we get focused on the wrong stuff. And that's a leadership role in big companies.
It is to remind people what you have to. So we do a lot of talking about this. Viv Goldstein, who's here, has led a great effort for us in FastWorks, but often say to our colleagues, like, once you've worked with startups, you also appreciate what it really means to risk. How many of you have had to go home and say, honey, I put a second mortgage on the house to make payroll.
Yeah.
Very few enterprise people know that feeling, right? We're not asking you to do that, right?
That's right.
So you're probably not going to lose your job.
Yeah.
In fact, you may lose your job if you don't risk more. But it's hard, right? And I know people join for different reasons, but it's a different kind of risk.
But I think I don't think anyone's figured it out, dealing with risk aversion and failure. But I think it's one of our gigantic leadership challenges. I don't think this country will get where it needs to be without dealing with it.
What else? What other stories? I was impressed. You have a great gallery of who's who in here. What were
we
some
start
of the
with
other?
the playbill because there are a lot of characters in the book.
I love that.
If you ever get confused, you want to go back and get a little summary of who that person is.
Yeah, I mean, who were some other ones that you want to point? I know you like them all, but
I like them all. They're all our children, and we cut out 80% of them too.
Yeah.
That's also the hardest part.
I look at Carly Zakin and Daniel Weisberg from The Skim.
Yeah.
And here were two entrepreneurs that worked at NBC.
Yeah, right.
So they worked in a big company and had these ideas but needed to go outside to do it.
Right.
Now they're working with big companies.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, that's a good example of they had them there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a very interesting story in the book and a very tricky one to write, and it's a very timely one right now, is the Levis Google story. And I wouldn't say Google's a startup, but the story was so interesting and they still have some of the characteristics of a startup that we wanted to tell it. I mean, here are two companies in Silicon Valley, separated by 145 years, trying to together create something that's never been done before. And that is to create fibers that are electronically conductive and build it into a garment so that you can stroke a garment and you can change your music, answer a call, get directions. So it has to withstand use, water, detergent. So they decided to build a bicycling jacket. They wanted to have a function that, so they started with a jacket, and they had all sorts of pitfalls. And the way that Levi's, which, is a company on the rise again, the way they dealt with, they had a whole different idea on the pace of innovation and on failure. And Google was a little bit arrogant in how they assumed how quickly this could all happen. So seeing those cultures coming together, how they worked together, how often they met, what they worked on, what happened when they faced challenges, barriers, things they didn't think they could solve. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of drama. Now the beautiful part of it, the jacket goes on sale this fall. So sometime this fall it'll be on sale. It's a hero story in the book. And it led, the people at Levi's say, well, we're changed forever by this. Because what they learned is Google just saw problems and barriers as wonderful. They just had an assumption they could figure it out. And I think it made Levi's more bold. And I think what Google learned from Levi's is this tremendous passion for the industry, passion for the consumer, artfulness in what they do, the sense of design, aesthetics. So it was really, sometimes Google acted like the legacy company, sometimes Levi's did. So you can also see the roles go back and forth. So it's a great story in the book.
You talk about getting outside in thinking, how to refresh your perspective.
Yeah.
It's something
Yeah.
we try to do a lot here.
Yeah.
I have a quote here from the book, if I can find it. But talk a little bit about how you say bringing in a radical outsider to change the soul of the company is a jarring thought.
Yeah.
Outsiders, whether they actually come from another company or serve as a longtime insider, who continually see and agitate for new directions, can be the most effective champions of positive change. That's a certain courage.
Yeah, it sure is.
On both parts, to bring them in and for that person to agitate for change.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, you know, we have a couple of examples in the book we call it an outsider's mindset, right? And you could be in a company for 3 decades and still have that. I think Ginny Rometty at IBM is kind of interesting. She has overseen several reboots of IBM. So she's always stayed up here. And you know how hard that is.
Yeah.
You know, you get embedded in an organization, you get attached emotionally to people, to things, to strategies. So to always stay up here, and I think part of the way you do that, Beth, is you get out a lot.
Yeah.
And you're a beautiful model of that. You spend an awful lot of time with startups, outsiders,
Well, it's my
different
job.
ideas.
I mean, you
Yeah,
take the marketing title
but
seriously.
you've always been like that, you know, in all fairness. So, and if I had to do my job at P&G all over again, if I had to go back and be CMO and turn the clock back, I got out a lot. I'd get out 3 times more. And so I think that we all need a strategy for it. What is people we meet, reading we do, how we treat our calendars. We've done a lot of work with executives since I left P&G on their calendar, taking it apart and analyzing
so the question,
it.
do I work for my calendar or does my calendar work for me?
And it's
right?
a simple idea. Anyone can do it.
Yeah.
Take the last 6 or 12 months, take it apart, analyze it, use that data, put it into buckets compared to what you would really like to do, what your goals are, the impact you're trying to make. It almost never lines up, not even close. And that's what outsider's mindset is. You want to do this, but you're spending your time here, change it and impact it.
So you do have time. It's just
Yes,
prioritizing.
right.
So maybe I'll ask some of my colleagues here questions. Anyone have a question, a thought you want to ask it at Jim? And I'll repeat the question so we can catch it on the microphone. Tomasz.
Yeah. So you said that 80% of the examples that you gathered went out. How did you select? What criteria did you use to select the 20?
We wanted a diversity of stories, of industries and people.
So the question is, how did you select?
Oh, how do we select the stories that are in the book and how do we cut out some that were cut out? We wanted a diverse selection of stories and people. Actually, I'm very conscious of, I think diversity is a fundamental truth to life and business, and I wanted there to be great diversity in the book in every way. So part of it was for those reasons. Part of it were some stories were more dramatic than others. And we wanted a playbook, so we had to have stories that kind of fit different stages of a partnership. And then there was the awkward stuff where we wrote the story, and I was also a believer that the company should be okay with the story. So we had to tell a story that was honest and real, but the company was still okay for it to be in the public domain. And there were a few that fell out because of that. Once we wrote it up, the company was just not quite, and I said, oh, that's your call. That's been the deal. If it's not good for you, we're not going to print it. And so a few fell out for that reason.
Kelly.
When in your research, when a startup or a partnership failed, were there any surprising patterns that you weren't expecting as to like why some of them, so the partnerships partnerships didn't work out?
I think
Surprises about why some of these
surprises,
partnerships didn't succeed.
Yeah. I think the biggest one was it typically wasn't for financial reasons. You know, it was usually cultural and relationship. And that was a bit of a surprise to me. And so I think it was it's so critical that we remember we're human beings and we're emotional, and it's important who we work with and how we care about them and how we communicate. So I think in the book research, I knew that was important, but I realized it was way more important than other factors.
Sam.
How do you manage the freedom to take risks and the need to drive ROI?
So the balance between taking risks and then the need to deliver a return.
Well, I think
Tough tension question,
it is
isn't it?
tough. I think you need to. I think there is a startup I talk about in the book that is called Bionic. I think some of you know them, and I think their approach is a pretty good one. Where take whatever your pool of money is, you know, if it's an R&D budget or an innovation budget, whatever it is, and spread it around pretty, you know, make lots of small bets that are strategic for the company, and have a process for feeding things that are working and cutting things off that are not working. That is so easy to say and so hard to do. But if you have an R&D budget, and I spent many years at P&G, we spent a lot of money in R&D, and maybe it was behind 40 projects at any given time. Maybe it should have been 400. Because, look at the VC model. They bet on a lot of things, assuming about 90% of them won't take, and 10 will. We don't think that way in most companies. So I think that's one way to deal with that. There are other ways, of course, but I think that's a good one, and he's profiled in the book because I think it's a really smart idea, and it's getting some traction in some firms.
So there are a couple of what I love is your sort of guidebook. I think you just have a lot of great wisdom here. One that I think can relate to whether you're in a startup or working in an enterprise is don't just get buy-in from the top. You see that so many times when, especially startups go, yeah, but the CEO is going to bring me in. And then they wonder why they can't get traction. And in fact, it's like everybody gangs up to not make it happen. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think in anything we do, and I certainly saw this in my career, still see it in my career, you need to socialize an idea like crazy. And don't count on the CEO. I mean, the CEO is important. They have to, but the idea gets better, you get broader alignment, it's more fun, it takes more time, but when you get to execution, everyone's behind it. I've done some work over the years, and this is a company that's in the book with Toyota, right? They're famous for how they socialize things. And sometimes it drives people crazy because it feels like it takes a tremendous amount of time to make a decision. But actually what happens is the decision gets better, and once it's made, everyone's on board, they go like crazy. So I think of the things that I failed on when I was at Procter & Gamble. I didn't socialize them enough, Beth. I actually moved too quickly. I was so assumptive it was right that I didn't take the time to go to my biggest deniers or the biggest skeptics and ask them why. And I think that takes some courage, it takes some vulnerability, but I recommend it highly.
In fact, one of the other things you talk about is that help change reluctant constituents by empowering them. Speak a little bit more. That just sounds so hard to do. So somebody's fighting you. They don't like what you're doing. Maybe they don't like you.
Yeah. Right.
And you're going to go to them and say, or they just don't like what you're doing.
Right.
And you're going to go and say, let's work together.
Yeah. Well, I think on many of these things, you may not get anyone to totally love what you're doing, but the fact you're going out and you're saying to them, and they'll get this, that you're going out and saying, I value your opinion. I'm working on something where I want your ideas. I want to understand why you like this or don't like it. And I'm not over-promising what can change, but it's important to me that I understand your point of view. And that never goes to bad places. And you have to put yourself out there, maybe be a bit more vulnerable. But I think it's, and in most people, we'll be okay to pilot something. Almost everyone will be okay to try something. And if your rationale isn't tight and they're picking that apart, then shame on you. You know, there's a story in the book from the Amazon ex-CTO, Rick Dalzell, about why Amazon is just still so incredible. And of course they have great technology, but he said they're relentless about their customer. And any failure is okay at that company, even big ones, if it's done with the customer intent in mind. And there's a very, I think, provocative story in there about someone who really screwed up. It affected the entire company. And when Jeff heard his story, he said, good for you. You had the right thinking. You didn't anticipate one implication of that, but you had the right thinking. So we'll recover, go back and do your work, but well done.
And you can imagine that symbolism of that act. You're telling the story, so people have clearly told the story inside and outside of Amazon. Other questions here? Nancy.
I have an exploratory intro meeting for partnership in 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Do you have any?
Do you want the book?
She's a speed reader, I know.
So the question is, you have a meeting in 5 minutes with a potential partner.
Yeah, and it might be in London.
So here we are. Do you want me to join you? I'd be happy to do that. I guess my advice would be start with a relationship and listening, get to know each other a bit. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you here? Why are they here? What are your hopes for this? You know, what do you hope the world will be better because of what you're doing? So take some time in the relationship, take some time on the goals, take some time on shared impact, and it'll all go to good places.
You know, with that, there's also an obligation, I think, to also say once you have that discussion, to realize that, hey, we're not aligned.
Yeah.
Right? And either we can get there or not, but we've seen so many partnerships where you've had, I know one group that says, my rule is I will only have 3 partnership meetings.
Yep.
And if we can't come to a common ground by 3 meetings, we call it quits.
Yep.
Because big companies can keep things going for a while.
Well, Viv, you have a quote in the book about cutting stuff off. If your measure is getting stuff done, then you'll get stuff done. If your measure is bringing value to the company and the customers and you cut something off early and you're rewarded for it, that's fabulous.
Talk about, Kristen.
So having studied startups and large global corporations very closely, what would you have told the 22-year-old Jim to go the startup route or the
Great
corporate
question.
route?
So start a 22-year-old Jim.
Well, I have a son who's young.
Go startup or go big company?
And he's gone, well, I'll tell you my son's story in a second, but I'll tell you my story. If I were there again, and my criteria would be different for the company I chose. I mean, I just found, this is interesting, I was cleaning out some files and found my criteria for going to Procter & Gamble 30 years ago.
Wow, what a nice find.
It wasn't, and it was very detailed, and I had numerically scored it.
Cute.
And I was weighing it against, I kicked out the other offers I got, I was weighing it against GTE Sprint, which was telecom back then, and that would have been a very different, interesting career, but it was those two. And I weighted it, and I did a pretty good job. But I think what I would have valued even more highly was the culture, the purpose, and the people. I valued those, but I would have put extra weighting on it. So to me, it's less startup or big enterprise, but it's those things. And I have to say, without being patronizing, that if I were starting over again and I was 22 or 23, I would look very seriously at you, at your company. Because I got in there doing the book research, I met a lot of people, I got to feel what was going on here. I also see what you send out there. You know, I read Harvard Business Review this weekend, and you have a couple stories in there about GE. And Jeff Immelt does this amazing, open, vulnerable story about his tenure. And I thought it was very moving. And I thought, this company is aiming big. It is trying to make a big impact in this world in big areas. And I think that's wonderful. And you invest in people, your PD, how you're thinking about performance development now. It's, you're really on the cutting edge. And if you can do that really well, which you are, you're bringing a lot of the qualities of a startup to a what, 300,000 person enterprise? I'd want to be a part of that. And my son right now, who works for a startup, and a great startup, and he's had a great couple of years there, but he's looking at going back for his MBA and got a really nice GMAT, so he's competitive at a lot of great schools. But he sort of wants to go maybe to an organization which also invests in him as well as he investing in the company. And getting that balance right is sometimes tough to do for a startup.
It is. So in the time we have left, can we? You've mentioned purpose several times. It's what you've dedicated your business to and your time to. I love that idea of your company as you work with friends. I just love that idea as a purpose and a statement of what you do. Talk about purpose, because I know many of the CEOs you've gone to advise about purpose. Why right now are people talking more about purpose than ever? Well, give us some tips on, if you're in a company, how do you exclaim your purpose?
Well, I think it's more, it's been trending for a long time, and I think it's still trending and will forever
Hopefully
trend.
it never goes out of style.
I know, but I don't think it will. But I think people have realized, actually I was in a panel at Adweek this morning, Linda Boff spoke at it, but Henry Blodgett of Business Insider kicked it off saying, the only entities that can improve life in this world now are business. Governments aren't doing a terribly good job at it. So, and I look at the businesses that are performing well, that are attracting amazing talent, that are changing significant things on the planet for people, for environment, and they not only talk about their purpose, they activate it, they live it, they never get tired of it, they're continually innovating against it. And this is such a simple concept, but so few get it right, and get it right over a long period of time. I mean, one of my friends and heroes is Paul Pullman at Unilever. He's an ex-P&G guy, and he's done a remarkable job at Unilever. And however you measure it, employee magnetism, business results, partnerships, they're really, really doing well. So I think what we're missing is two things. A lot of leadership teams don't really figure out how to embrace it and work it across functions.
It seems like you're not supposed to bring it into the meeting, right? If you're not getting down to business, you're right. So how do you get business leaders over that?
What we have done, and this is a very human thing, if a company calls us and says, we think we could benefit from what you bring to the party, which is helping maybe figure out how to help us to activate our purpose better, we talk to everyone one-on-one, and we do a very deep, it's psychology, honestly. We go in and we ask, why do you come to work? Why have you chosen this company? Why have you stayed? What are your happiest days, your saddest days? What impact do you want to leave? What do you do every day that turns you on? What drives you crazy? And when you do that with a 15-person or so leadership team, you come back with a pretty clear story, usually. And you just tell that story back to them. You say, now do you want to deal with this? Because there's a lot of emotion and energy in this room that is pent up. And then once that dialogue starts, and you start putting metrics against it, and you start trying some different things, it never goes back. It never goes back. So leadership team, dynamics and behavior based on purpose, we still have a lot of work to do on that. And the other area I wish we had, and maybe this is something we could work on together, if you want to measure your sustainability at GE, you probably know how to do that.
Yeah, we have lots of good measurements.
If you want to measure your status against your purpose, probably less. So I'd like us to develop some sort of index for purpose, and one that could be broadly applied. I get a lot of questions. How do we benchmark against others on purpose?
What are some things you look to now? I assume you mentioned you have a checklist.
We have a checklist,
I
we have a
find
criteria.
Like you go into a culture and is language similar? Do they refer to things similarly? What's on your list?
I mean, we look at some things like, first of all, is it public, and is it articulated, and is it clear, and is it simple? We look at, do you understand how many people understand it and understand their role in it? Is it embedded into the metrics of each function and region? Does everyone have a part of initiatives that are related to your purpose? Has it affected your innovation pipeline? Is it something you talk about during leadership team meetings? Is it something you communicate inside and outside the company? So I'm rambling a bit here, but it's basically
really good.
A list of criteria like that. And that's not bad. It's based on our experience with working with dozens and dozens of companies, but I'd like to bring a bit more quant to that. I think it would help the industry, help business, and keep moving us in the right direction.
So I want to end with any last questions that we have from our team here. Anyone have a question you want to get to Jim before we wrap up? So Jim, thank you for this. Unleash the Innovators. You're starting your book tour. It was for sale starting last week.
Right.
You're out visiting a lot of companies. I hear that a lot of people are having parties for you.
We're 2 in New York next week. You want to come? Well, thank you. Thank you, all of you, for being so generous
Thank you very much.
with your time.
Really, I highly recommend it, and good luck with everything.
Thank you,
Thanks
Beth.
a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.